Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Mad Mamluks. I'm Mahin and I'm here with my co-hosts, Sim and Summer. And today on our show, we welcome live in studio, Sister Dalia Mogahed. We're super excited to have you, Dalia.
Thank you for having me. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. You know, you're someone that doesn't need a lot of introduction, but as a formality, I'd like to just brief our listeners on your background. You're the Director of Research at the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding in Washington, D.C. She's also the President and CEO of Mogahed Consulting, a Washington, D.C. based executive coaching and consulting firm specializing in Muslim societies and the Middle East. She is the former executive director of the Gallup Center for Muslim Studies, a non-partisan research center that provided data and analysis to reflect the views of Muslims all over the world. And she was selected as an advisor by former President Barack Obama on the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. And you're in town for the Muslim fundraiser, a great organization that's doing a lot of work for Muslims with disabilities and special needs, etc. So we encourage everybody to look up Muslim. They're a big supporter of our podcast. I hear you were on The Daily Show recently as well. I tried to Google it earlier, and I saw a clip actually from a Bangladeshi atheist group that posted a clip, to be honest.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think that's like the only clip that's available on YouTube right now.
And
it's making the rounds. Huh?
So when was that, and how did you get that invite? How did that work out for you?
Okay, so it was actually a year ago, in January of 2016, and it was the craziest thing. I just got an email into the ISPU, like info at ISPU, that was an invitation to be on The Daily Show, and it was that random. So it was really exciting and terrifying at the same time. But the producer had seen me on MSNBC on Meet the Press a few weeks before, and thought it would be good to have someone on. She said that it was the first, Muslim American to speak on the show about Muslim American issues in some time. So they thought it was important to bring that voice in.
When you meet a guy like Trevor Noah, are you kind of like, you have stage fright or an awe, or is that something that...
He's really witty. He can be intimidating, like super witty, smart people.
Yeah.
They can be really intimidating because they can throw you off and you'll be on your heels for the rest of the interview. Right. But you kept your poise, and not just that, you're representing all Muslims all over the country. Everyone's looking at you, and you had some nice comments right back at him.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that was also one of the most concise and clear explanations of hijab that I've heard in 15, 20 years.
Oh, thank you.
Even shuyukh that explain it, they bring in a lot of academic and theological information, but when you explained it, I was like, okay, this is going to reach so many people and really they'll understand it on a deeper level, I think.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm glad you guys thought it went well. I definitely did not take it lightly. I didn't just kind of show up on the studio and say whatever came to my mind. I prepared relentlessly for that interview, and I hired a coach, an actual comedy coach. Her name is Judy Carter. I'm putting in a plug for her. If you can afford her, hire her. She's amazing. And we went through the kinds of questions he might ask and kind of some responses, and it wasn't scripted at all. I mean, I had no idea what he was going to say, but I definitely prepared. And I interestingly, the only thing I didn't anticipate, stupidly enough, is a question on hijab. I didn't actually, for some crazy reason, prepare for that. So that part was entirely spontaneous. That was the clip that everybody kind of grabbed onto.
Yeah. So I want to tell everybody the story how you came on the show. Like, literally, this happened in the last few days. So you put up a Facebook post on marriage that I guess went viral. And I think I commented on it and said, Sister Dalia, why don't you come on the Mad Mamluks and discuss? And then Summer jumped in, and then Sim's wife commented like, oh, she's going to be in town for the Muslim fundraiser. Y'all should get her on.
And I'm looking at this. I'm like, real professional, guys. This is how you message and message guests and pressure them to come on our show.
We had a guest on last night, and we told her we were talking to you about this, and she's like, yeah, forget anything else, just talk to her about that, because that's what everyone wants to hear about. So let's get into that a little bit. I feel like we have to do that justice. We can't just use that as bait to bring you on and then ignore it. So I want to read the post first, and then you can kind of explain, just so we're not taking anything out of context, etc. So the post says, So many amazing Muslim women having a hard time finding a spouse. What is up, brothers? Why is this happening to successful, attractive, practicing Muslim women? Why is there such a deficit of comparable, interested Muslim males available to them? Before the angry objections, please just take a step back and reflect. And then I think you did a follow-up comment about like you'd want your sons to marry up, etc. I had no disagreement with this post personally. My wife's a gynecologist and I'm a janitor. I'm actually not a janitor. I'm an engineer, but she's people. I've mentioned this before. Like she makes 3 times more money than I do, right? Yeah. So I'm okay with it because like for me it eliminates financial headaches. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? But like, and you said you got some data that you're trying to collect. What sparked this kind of a post from you?
What sparked it is just so many meetings with meeting women all over the country. So I travel all the time, right? I'm in a different city almost every weekend, and I meet lots of people, and I've just been meeting so many women who are unable to find a spouse, and they're like, as I said, amazing. They are successful, accomplished, educated, attractive, and yet are unable to find a spouse. And at the same time, I also meet men who are probably, similar to them in education and accomplishment and the same age. And they have a huge, literally line of sisters that are desperate to marry them. So it's like, if these women were men, same age, same level of attractiveness, if that's a word, and same job, they would have all kinds of choices, and yet these sisters are having such a hard time, and I don't know what is the problem.
Don't you think that a lot of guys can say the same thing though, that a lot of women have much more higher expectations of brothers as well? That a lot of guys that we talk to, they say that, nowadays they want a guy who looks like Tom Brady, and I can't, there's no way in the world I can ever live up to that. Maybe I can, make similar money, but in terms of, being well off, not a millionaire, but, well off and provide that kind of, a nice home and all the bells and whistles that come along with that. But
well, I understand that. These women that I'm talking to are not 21. They're older. They're not old in my opinion. They're in their 30s, maybe very early 40s. And no, they're not looking for a movie star. They're not expecting anything even close to that. And they're perfectly open to considering someone who is going to be making less money, who has, not as many degrees as them. It's not them with the higher than realistic expectation. It's just the availability seems like it's not there.
These are sisters that have never been married for the most part.
In most cases, yeah, they have never been married.
Yeah,
so they're not. Yeah. It's not. And of course, there's another group of women who have been divorced or have kids and things like that. But these are actually unmarried sisters who have never been married in their mid-30s and have great careers and so forth, but can't find a spouse.
Yeah, some of the conversations that I've had with a lot of similar women have been that, okay, so, I may have all of these other great things like education and a career, but they're still asking me about like how round my bread is when I I make bread at home. Like, how round is your paratha? And it's it's such a kind of like crazy question, because you're like, wait, no matter what other things that I may be able to do, at the end of the day, really my round paratha-ness is what's going to get me like a good proposal, as opposed to actually accomplishing other things and other facets of my life. And I don't think it's unfair for even women to be seeking an equal, right? Someone who's also just as educated and everything like that. So yes, I know that women are like willing to, because like numbers wise, or the perception of numbers is that, oh, they're men that are just, they're so few and far between. We have to be desperate and just say okay to whatever.
There is data about that though, right? Isn't there data that there are more?
Someone was telling us last night that him and Hib have been researching that for a while, and he's been like, he just thinks it's a sheer lack. There's just more women than men in every age group.
Right.
I don't know if you've ever.
I think the
encountered
BBC
that.
had an article about that not too long ago.
I don't know. Dalia, you're the data guru, though. So, like, tell if it's true or not.
So there aren't actually more women than men in America that are Muslim.
Okay.
There's actually slightly more men than women that are Muslim in America. But there are more highly educated women than men. So the education deficit is there. And so more women are more likely to have a college education. Muslim women are more likely than Muslim men to have a higher education. And that might help to explain this issue. But in terms of just sheer numbers, no, there aren't more women than men.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I actually have a theory that I'm going to posit to why you're meeting all these women, okay? So I have a very good friend who's now married and whatnot, but I don't know, like, I grew up with them 15 years ago. There was a girl he liked, and, you know, in their early 20s, both of them, and the girl's parents were like, no, we only want a doctor, okay? So the dude's like, all right, moved on. He got married, had a couple kids. This sister is now like 32 and still not married. So that's one thing. I think that they have too many expectations when they're 20s.
Yeah.
And then the guys that would want to marry them, they just I haven't met many guys that are like adverse to marrying up personally. I know some mashayikh, when I got married, some of my teachers were like, why would you like do that? Because, you know, she's going to have the power with the money and all that stuff. I'm like, sounds like less headache for me, man, to be honest. You know what I mean?
You've got this all figured out, yeah.
You know?
That was very insightful of you.
And then the other thing is, I think the parents are the ones, like, so, like, my wife is a physician, right? I was joking about the janitor part. I'm an engineer, but still, like, an MD versus a bachelor's degree is still another level.
Right.
And my wife grew up in Mississippi, and I tell her this, so this is not something that's a secret. I told her I think if she grew up in Chicago, we never would have gotten married. Because I go to Mississippi where we're finding a religious dude is like, you know, pretty much next to impossible. So that's what I heard.
a huge advantage, right?
It's like you play the market. And so, I'm only going to speak for myself. I know Sim's wife's from Arkansas.
Yeah.
Summer's from Mississippi.
Yeah.
I'm speaking for myself. I
You guys
know
all
that
tapped into areas where our pool was very, very small.
Yeah.
So we had to pick you guys.
Desperate Southern girls who need to get out of their small town.
Yeah.
That's the key,
so
brothers.
That's the strategy. We have to write it down.
It wasn't like, it's not like that was the strategy I had in mind. It just so happened, and looking back, I theorized that because when I look at the family pressure, even for my own family, they're like, well, you got to get a master's degree at some point. When are you going to go back to school because your wife has more status than you? And I'm like, so what?
Yeah.
You know? So what are your thoughts on that?
No, I think you hit a really important point, which is this whole conversation changes with age, right? So yes, I agree that part of the problem is the expectation of mostly women's parents when they're in their very, very early 20s, right? Right after graduating from college, they have very, very high, unrealistic expectations around the degree and the money and everything like that. And that does make things really difficult. And if then a woman isn't able to get married with those kinds of expectations, then as she gets older and she's still continuing to accomplish things in 30s, 35, 38, 39, 40, 41, it becomes harder and harder. And so I'm really speaking to both women and men and both parents, both sets of parents, that I think it has to be a lot more simple, and we just can't have these kinds of ridiculous expectations. Really, it has to come down to personal compatibility and integrity and
I think
kindness.
I think our message to Muslim communities throughout the country, and these are communities that are young immigrant communities too. A lot of there's, as much as we want to think about the next generation of Muslims, we also have to understand that there's a stream of immigrants still coming to this country who have a lot of these old school ideas kind of stuck in their head, and they're kind of pressuring their kids still to marry, doctors and stay in that circle, right? So I think there needs to be a message kind of sent to our communities that, hey, you don't have to be a doctor or an engineer to be successful in life. There are many other professions that are just as successful and have a lot of respect along with that too, right?
I think it's like almost the perfect storm of, being an immigrant family, looking for stability, trying to get a really financially viable job, encouraging your kids to do that. And then also maybe coming from a country where, capitalism wasn't, at the forefront and materialism wasn't at the forefront, or maybe that like echelon of attaining it wasn't feasible, back home. And so here, whenever you're living the American dream for yourself, for your kids, it's like, okay, so she's going to be a doctor. She's got to marry a doctor, and kind of chasing that and thinking that's what's going to give them the happiness. And we need to kind of, like you're saying, simplify that. Like, is that actually what brings happiness in a marriage? Is that what actually is going to bring the person satisfaction and fulfillment in life? And so being able to take that step back and be like, okay, we were really worried about financially being stable and all that viability and stuff, but we can take a step back now and rethink kind of, okay, ethically, Islamically, like what are the actual characteristics we should be looking at in a person? Because I know for my own personal situation that, alhamdulillah, I got married to my husband before he had even completed his undergrad, but alhamdulillah, my parents had agreed to it, partly because we were in Mississippi, right? that played a role, yeah. I'm not going to lie. But at the same time, they saw decency. They saw a family life and a structure that was going to fit in well with us, and they saw a good person. And then ultimately, alhamdulillah, he completed his education. He's working on his MBA now. So those things can come later on as well. But if we go back to making it simpler and basic, then I think there'd be a lot more sisters who find good matches.
I mean, to my wife's credit, her parents wanted her to marry a doctor, and she said absolutely not. Because she's like, awesome. She's like, because she knows what goes into it, residency, 100-hour weeks, on call. You can't have two parents doing that and have kids. It's like, you might as well just outsource, all your parenting at that point, right?
Look, and having parents support young people getting married, because that's when young people want to get married the most. That's when hormones are going crazy, and having parents being that structure in your life and allowing that marriage to be successful, that young marriage to be successful is so important. I was also just like Summer. I got married when I was 20 and my wife was 19, and it wouldn't have happened without my parents. I didn't even complete my undergrad then. She didn't complete it, but we both got through it. There were tough years. There were some times that, you're like, did I make the right decision? But hindsight's 2020. You can say that, but you were living that in your 19 and 20. You saw all your friends having, girlfriends and doing non-Islamic things, right? And now you look back on all those years, you're like, I did make the right decision.
But at the same time, I think the other thing with a lot of brothers, though, when they're early 20s are hella immature. And I posted that in your thread, too,
it's true. It's not one size fits all for everyone.
So
everyone is
like
different.
A lot of guys, because I know a lot of guys, for example, I remember I met a brother a few years ago. He was like 27. He's like, man, I need to get married, man. And he's like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm working at Subway. Did you finish school? He's like, nah, I, took a break. I'm like, but I took a break so I could go get a job so I could make money to get married. I'm like, you gotta get your stuff together, man. Like, you can't just like say I want to get married, because it is driven by hormones. Yeah. And that's all there is to it. There's no other component that they're thinking about, right? So at the same time, like, a lot of like these younger sisters who are like who want to get married, part of your question, what is up, brothers, is that some of the brothers are just too obsessed with like, video games and I don't know, whatever.
Careers. And would you support your kids getting married early?
I definitely would.
Yeah. And I know it's different for each parent. They have to assess whether their kid can actually handle it. When I look back at myself when I was 20, and I think back, now I have 3 daughters, right? If a guy like me came asking for my daughter's hand, I'd probably be very, very skeptical, because I know how immature I was at that age, and it's a really difficult situation. And I would recommend any parent in that situation just to, just have a very close relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and make sure that you do, the salat istikhara and make sure that all those bases are covered. And, as long as you're seeking the pleasure of Allah at the end of the day, I think it'll be okay. You
mentioned, Dalia, that you were collecting some data. You mentioned that, there are right now more, Muslim men, than women, but education level is flipped, right? Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you've seen so far in the data that you've collected?
Well, that's the main one, and then just also a slight difference in economics. Women are more likely to fall into sort of the middle class bracket, and there's more men in the lower socioeconomic bracket among Muslims. So there is a real difference between men and women in our community in terms of education and socioeconomics, and that does make it difficult. And it is resulting, I think, in this issue of women unable to find a comparable spouse. I guess my question is, why is this happening? I don't have the answer. Why are there more women finishing college than men? Why is there a crisis among our men? What is happening with our men? I feel like I've been noticing this for a long time. I just feel like our men, sometimes I feel like they lack role models. They just don't have, society has confused men in many ways. People are confused about what it even means to be a man. And unfortunately, the confusion often results in two extremes that are both harmful, where either being manly or being a man is associated with being very aggressive, being very demeaning to women, which is not the sunnah. Or, on the other hand, having no differentiation whatsoever between men and women, where men aren't stepping up with responsibilities or a sense of chivalry or of wanting to be, a protective figure in their family's life. And so it's this weird situation where there's a lack of guidance as to the Islamic model of manhood. There's too much emphasis, frankly, on women. I mean, every other lecture is women in Islam, women's rights, women's this.
Totally.
And men are being ignored. And honestly, as a mother of two boys, I care about that. And I care about the deficit in attainment, in educational attainment. I care about the fact that, this isn't just Muslims, it's overall. Boys are falling behind versus girls academically. I want to see all boats rising. I don't see it as progress for boys to fall behind. Yeah. That's not what female empowerment was about. It was not about making men fall behind.
And how old are your boys?
I have a 10 and an almost 17-year-old.
Okay, so as parents, I have a daughter and another girl on the way. You've got one son.
And 3 girls and a boy.
So those who have sons, what advice would you give to them? Because the root is, if you're already 25 years old, the ship may have sailed in some regards, right? But, for your situation and for Summer and for Sim who have sons who are young, they can still, parent in a way that encourages, I guess, a return to masculinity at one angle, mm-hmm. without necessarily getting on the red pill either. Have you heard of red pill theory?
No, I haven't. What is the red pill theory?
No, it's a super male empowerment movement. Yeah. It's kind of taken.
It could go misogynistic even. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty misogynistic.
That's really interesting because this blogger wrote this very critical article about my post, and she calls herself the red pill chick.
Oh yeah, I read that post. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, what does that even mean? Now I understand.
Yeah, it's some hyper masculine movement that's I in many ways I think extreme. There's always a sprinkle of truth in everything, mm-hmm. but just because you have some truth in your message doesn't mean the entire message is also
true.
Validated.
And that's why I just think it's so important for men to reclaim Muslim masculinity, and because it's a beautiful, balanced type of manhood, and it's exemplified in the Prophet ﷺ, who was incredibly kind, compassionate, and responsive to his spouse, cared what she thought, and was very tender with her. At the same time, was very strong and a leader.
Right.
And so it's not an either or at all. You don't have to be weak to not be aggressive. There's this confusion in society today. And I think we can actually play as Muslims a leadership role in bringing back this balanced idea of what masculinity is about.
Right. And I think what fosters that is a lot of like what you said, leadership roles. Leadership brings in some of those biological built-in functions in men, at least, where they need to take command of situations and resolve disputes, and that is like a healthy form of masculinity, at least what I think.
I think there are some Muslim men that have recognized that. I know Nabil's trying to do that with becoming the alpha Muslim. It's not perfect. A lot of people have disagreements with him and stuff, but the intent is, again, to try to return to masculinity. He actually put a YouTube video on, and he was talking about how, like, his theory was that guys should focus in their 20s really on becoming, because he thinks that guys are getting rejected by girls. A lot of them because they're not up to par. So he's like, well, you guys in your 20s need to focus on being successful, being physically fit, like learning how to communicate, learning emotional stability and all that stuff. And then when you hit 30, then you should go on the market.
Well, I think you made a great point about this balance between this, extreme masculinity where it's like, aggressiveness and everything. And on the opposite side, no gender difference, right? And I think, you have that view within general society. And then within Muslim communities, you have your own version of that, where a strong man is one who doesn't communicate with women effectively, who basically ignores their presence, who lets doors slam in their faces, and acts like they don't exist. That's being a good man. That's how you respect women somehow. And I think that's also something that gets lost in translation, that, we may have, gender roles and we may have the appropriate relationship between genders, but that doesn't mean you can treat them in this way either. And so that return to chivalry and return to...
Yeah, I agree.
There's balance is so important.
There's very little that I've seen or heard in terms of education around this idea of shahama, of Muslim chivalry, of what does that mean? How should you treat women in general, like other than just pretend they don't exist? Like
right.
we just aren't teaching our boys how to behave in a way that is in line with the Sunnah in this regard, in terms of chivalry, in terms of that responsibility of being a father or husband. What does that actually mean?
Right. And subhanAllah, like, aside from, the imam of the masjid or some shuyukh that are male, most of the time our kids are interacting with females as their teachers, right? Within school, or even like to learn how to read Quran in the very beginning. Oftentimes they're having female teachers at home. The mother is the teacher. And so until they can see that example of male chivalry in the best form in front of them and guiding them and sticking with them, how else are they going to learn that? So we've put our boys into Boy Scouts. It's like a local Muslim troop. And, I keep pushing my husband, like, I can go and I can take them, but they need to see you. They need to see that Muslim chivalry with the balance in real life and see what does that mean and how is that practically going to apply to me as a kid,
Yeah, I agree.
Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about regarding the marriage poster? I think we covered it.
Yeah.
I know, Sim, you had some questions about I guess Islamic extremism and all the data that Dalia has put together in her career regarding that.
Dalia, you kind of got on my radar just by the engagement that you've been doing with ISPU, well, with the government, and I think you first started this engagement with Barack Obama. And back then, I gave it a kind of a stink eye. I'm like, well, what kind of engagement is this? Is she giving my mom's biryani recipes?
No, of course not. I would never do that.
What kind of secrets are you telling about the Muslim community to the White House? So can you explain to us what kind of engagement was involved in this interaction with the government? So
I have never really been involved with any political campaign. I'm not. That's just not what I have ever done. I've always been a researcher. So I was with Gallup. I headed the Center for Muslim Studies, and I co-authored a book with John Esposito called "Who Speaks for Islam? What a Billion Muslims Really Think." And it was based on surveys that Gallup did around the world, representing 90% of the global Muslim population. It was the largest study ever done on Muslims ever. And it looked at what Muslims think about everything from their relationship with the West to women's rights to extremism to democracy. So I think this research just was something that the campaign, the Obama campaign became aware of. And then when they got into office, I was invited to serve as an advisor to the president on the Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships Advisory Council in 2009. So it was a long time ago. And that engagement was, on a council, and it involved really advising the government on how to engage or how to solve problems in the world. So there was a long list of issues that the president wanted us to focus on. And my role was to, with a lot of other people, create recommendations on how the government could better engage Muslims around the world. So that was the engagement. And I've been, in communication with the White House since then. But it wasn't like formal employment. It was a sort of an honorary advisory role. I kept my job at Gallup the whole time. Now I'm with the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. And what I do now is I focus on the American Muslim community. So I went from global to local, or to at least domestic. And I direct research at ISPU, and we're a think tank that focuses on the American community, the American Muslim community. And we do research that looks at both the internal issues within the community as well as the social and political issues that act on the community. So we deal with things like developing an inclusive, welcoming mosque and Islamophobia and its impact on the community.
Is extremism even still a thing? I heard from a lot of people, like, it seems like it's a dead topic, and when it happens, an extremist attack or a terrorist attack, it's extremely rare. Is that still something that you guys are focusing on, or?
We don't focus on that very much. It is definitely still a thing that other people focus on.
Right.
There's an entire industry.
Right.
The extremism industrial complex, basically, that does nothing but comment or study or have opinions on this issue. But we're not as involved in this specific topic. The most we've done is we hosted a debate at ISNA last year on if it was a net positive or a net negative for the Muslim community to engage with the government on countering violent extremism programs, CVE.
Right. And I wanted to ask you about that. Have you taken a stance on that, whether that's a positive thing or a negative thing? Because it seems like there was a lot of criticism towards CVE from some people in the Muslim community regarding giving certain leaders in our community a link to the government, and they're going to have some financial ties that might, skew their opinions or their relationship with the rest of the Muslim community. So,
right.
Can you comment on that?
Yeah. So I certainly have my own opinions about CVE and engaging on CVE, but what ISPU as an institute does not take a position on it.
Right.
So one of our areas of impact is called thought leadership, meaning one of the things we do is we offer the community a neutral platform to debate, to actually disagree respectfully. And one of the issues that there's a lot of controversy around is engaging on CVE.
Right.
And there's very strong opinions on both sides. So we wanted to provide a platform for the community to hear both sides of the issue,
right.
to offer, okay, let's actually hear what each side is saying, and then exercise critical thinking and form your own opinion. So that's what we did.
What has been the community's response?
Well,
has it been positive?
It's been very positive, actually.
Towards
generally,
CVE?
Not towards CVE,
okay.
toward the idea of debating it, the idea of actually getting both sides on the table. Generally, I have seen. I've never looked. I've never done a survey, so this isn't an exact number, but my perception is that there's a slight, slight slant or slight leaning of the community to be skeptical of CVE, even under Obama. And now with the new administration and the new name even for it, which explicitly, cites Islam as the problem, now people are just totally want to wash their hands of it.
Oh yeah,
There's been a lot of pressure on groups that have taken or have applied for CVE money to return that money.
Yeah, I can imagine, because if you study history, that is one of the ways that even if you go all the way to the Middle Ages, anytime there's a minority who wants rights, the majority or the government would instill kind of like feudal lords within the community and make sure that they gain a lot of financial benefit from their relationship with the government, and they kind of keep the community in line. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it is a problematic relationship.
Yeah, and even without involving CVE officially, there's always been, Muslims have never been shy about throwing others under the bus. You know what I mean? Based upon, random ideological differences that they will, read into, incorrectly, and then accuse them of being an extremist, right? So CVE, now you're adding a financial component to it. It's just like the reason for skepticism is certainly there, rational, I would say. Mm-hmm. I do have a question as we start wrapping up here. Sometimes you hear these cases of kids or people getting involved in ISIS that are mind blowing. There is a case, I don't know if you saw this. I want to say last year there in Starkville, Mississippi, there is a family, the brother and his fiance. So this brother, his mom is Caucasian American. His dad is Palestinian. They've been stalwarts in the Starkville, Mississippi community for years. They owned a restaurant that all Mississippi State undergrads used to go to. So they had their sons were all super successful. So their youngest son was a college student or just graduated college, and his fiance was an African American convert. And a picture of her is her in a cheerleader outfit. And they got arrested at the airport on accusations of going to join ISIS, and that's all you hear. And when you look at the pictures of the people, it looks like a white dude and a black girl in a cheerleader outfit. And I'm like, is this BS or is this real? Based upon what you've researched, how does this happen?
I have no idea. I don't even think I wouldn't call myself in any way an expert on what actually makes people go to join these groups, which is a totally different field than what I research, which is public sympathy for violence in general. And when it comes to public sympathy for violence, there is no correlation with religiosity. Absolutely none. If there's a correlation with anything, it's usually political anger and political rage. Yeah. And it's not even, when you say disenfranchisement in some ways, but it's not economic disenfranchisement. So that's one thing that sometimes the Islamophobes will point to and say, well, it's not poor people, it's not unemployed people. And they're right. It's not. And when you look at data on public sympathy for violence, they're not more likely to be poor and they're not more likely to be unemployed, those people who sympathize with violence. They are more likely to be angry and to be paying attention to what they perceive to be injustice in the world. And that's just in terms of the public.
Right.
I will add that Muslims are no more likely than anyone else to sympathize with violence. In fact, the opposite is true.
Right.
And those who do sympathize are not more religious and won't even explain their position in terms of religion. That's, I think, a really important point. They're not citing ayahs that the Islamophobes say are the problem. They're not coming up with any of these sort of theological explanations that the Islamophobes claim is the problem. They're coming up with very secular rationales, like revenge or reciprocity, things like that. It's not a religious argument that at least the public who sympathizes with these acts are giving us.
I remember a boy when I was growing up. He was in a school that was predominantly white school, got beaten up all the time just because of his skin color. This was before, Islamophobia was even a name.
Right.
And I remember that boy, he would always, back then, this is pre-9/11 days again, so Bosnian troops would come from Bosnia. And they would be, showing all this massacres that are happening all around the world. And this person dealt with a lot of internal struggle on how he can help the Muslim world, because he saw, this message of brotherhood in our religion, that, we're supposed to take care of each other. And as he's growing up, he's seeing all these people who talk about freedom, that they're kind of purporting dictators all around the world. And they're kind of behind some of the conflicts that are happening in the Muslim world. A lot of his struggles, he thought about it, and he was like, well, I have to do something, but I have to figure out the right way of doing it. And I think about this boy quite often, because I think about what I would tell him, at this time in my life. I'm like, what, I'm much more mature. I could probably have given him better advice back then on how to handle all these conflicted messages of, brotherhood. But then all of a sudden you hear about freedom, and then you're seeing all this chaos in the world. How would you kind of sort this out in his head? What would you say to someone like that? Someone growing up, maybe your kids, they're seeing all these conflicted messages of, American foreign policy, and you see your Muslim family being, destroyed all around the world, whether it's Burma, Syria, Yemen. What should be the message for parents to their children?
Well, I think the first thing is that we have to give them a channel for that anger. I think that is, it's righteous anger, right? You're looking at injustice and you're angry about it, which is how any normal human being, any moral human being should respond to injustice. So we have to validate and acknowledge that. And then we have to help them channel that rage into something constructive. Because if you look at every social movement for justice, it starts with that spark of righteous anger. Those things are not wrong to feel, but what is wrong is acting unjustly in response to that, acting in a way that is displeasing to God. Right. And so when I've spoken to shuyukh who've been able to turn people away from, wanting to go do something crazy because they're angry, what they've done is they've never denied that person's anger, denied the reason for their anger. Those things are real. Those things are true. But there are other ways to deal with them. You have to give them constructive ways to channel that energy, whether it's, peaceful protest, whether it's civic engagement. There has to be an alternative channel for those feelings.
And I think one of the first failures was not being accepted in society, not being accepted as an American. You're not a real American. And I think that kind of message,
the outcasting process.
Right, exactly. When you're not accepted, then you have all these thoughts in your head, and you're building all these conclusions based on whatever little experience you've had in life, right?
No, for sure. No, the parenting aspect's pretty key and whatnot, and then when you're dealing with young kids, and I think for us as children of immigrants, a lot of I'm assuming this boy, his dad was probably like an immigrant who wasn't connected. It's going to be much easier for us as parents to hopefully connect. And I think hopefully, inshallah, in the future generations, we won't have that much of an issue. I hope.
Yeah. And I talk to my daughters now, man, things have changed night and day. I mean, they have regular friends, non-Muslim friends who are, they do their own thing, but she's able, and they respect, her religion, and they totally don't have a problem with her not going to parties and whatnot, So when we were young, when we tried to develop these relationships with non-Muslims and regular folk, either you're in or you're out. Your relationship was broken if you didn't go to parties and things like that, So I think things are looking up in that respect. I think we are getting that acceptance, but I think some of the younger communities, some of the communities like in the South and in the West that are forming, they might be kind of going through this cycle all over again that we did in the big cities in New York and Chicago and LA. So that is still a challenge, I think.
Sure. Well, only time will tell, but we got to let Dalia run because she's got to go to a fundraiser. Before we close this off, what's your preferred method of social media for people who want to engage with you? I know we talk, obviously Facebook is pretty popular, and that's what we talked about today with the marriage post. But where else can people find you on social media?
Okay, so other than Facebook, I'm on Twitter and I'm also on Instagram, but Facebook is probably my primary outlet for expression.
Okay, very cool. Well, Jazakallah khair for coming in on short notice and on a tight schedule. We really happy to have this discussion with you. For our listeners,
Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. We'd love to have you on if you're ever in Chicago again. By the way, do you live in Wisconsin?
I don't. I grew up in Wisconsin.
Okay.
I now live in Southern California.
Okay, I got you. That's what I thought. I thought you guys were out in California and whatnot. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. For any questions or comments, you can email us at themadmamluks@gmail.com. One thing that we do want you guys to do is like our Facebook page, but also leave us some comments on Facebook. And we want our threads to go viral too. That's why we have.
You never know what it might lead to.
So maybe we'll have a little post regarding this episode when it comes out. We'll see. Hopefully it gets lit just like the thread on Dalia's Facebook page. But, and also subscribe to us on iTunes, rate us 5 stars, and we are on Podcast Addicts, right? On Android?
On Android, yeah.
Okay,
that's
Podcast Addicts, because I've been telling people SoundCloud, and then I can't even find it.
Yeah. That's if you're using a computer, maybe you can, you hop onto SoundCloud or one of those other, as long as you're in the iTunes directory.
Yeah.
You're accessible to the world, so that's all that matters.
Excellent. All right, well, for our special guest, Dalia Mogahed, and for my co-hosts, Summer and Sim, this is Mahin signing off for the Mad Mamluks. Assalamu alaikum.